So yeah, thank you, David, for taking the time to be in conversation with me. I reached out to you over text, um, seeing if we could have a conversation and record it, and you responded back saying that you might want to explore letting go, or letting go would be something that you think would be cool to explore together. Um,
Well, you had a topic before that, right?
Yeah, so the topic before I had was death. And you responded that you might not be the expert on that, which is clear to me sitting in front of you, um, in that you're alive. But people do sometimes remember deaths, or, part of me was like, I wonder um, if David thinks about death, or if
Mhm.
I look to you as like an elder. Um, So there's some way in which I feel like you're closer to it than me, to put it in kind of crass terms.
Although we don't necessarily know that.
That's true too. Yeah, so the
So,
sooner I can prepare, the better.
well, that's sort of an interesting, um, there is, of course, in the Dharma world, this notion of practicing Dharma as a preparation for recognizing impermanence in the situation. And
Right.
it can get very literal in terms of like preparing for leaving the body and so forth. But I thought we could just explore it a little bit more without any assumptions from the big ground up.
So where do we begin?
Well, well, let's start with death. And by that, what do you actually mean?
So my understanding is that there's like a point at which the body stops working, um, and then maybe something after that, maybe not something after that, depending on your view.
Yeah.
Um, and
Have you ever
so
seen a corpse?
I have, yes.
Hmm.
In medical school, we were introduced to corpse in like our second week.
What was your impression of the corpse?
Very much not alive. Yeah.
And if you knew the person, before that, is the feeling that that person's not there anymore, or how would you sort of frame it?
Yeah, I would probably frame it like that, that their beingness isn't there anymore.
Hmm. Yeah. So, we're talking about what I think is the single most potent topic for human beings. I think other types of beings just try to avoid death. So, like in the animal realm or something like that, you're just desperately trying to avoid becoming somebody else's meal for the night. And as a
Hmm.
human being, we've been spared that, probably except in certain, you know, cultures in which it's okay to, look at a human being as food. So we're not being tracked down by people who are starving and they want to, eat our bodily stuff to survive. But most animals on the planet are live every day like that, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Every single day. So, and they're also looking at prey. So the prey and predator kind of mentality is very strong in that realm.
Mm.
It's more subjugated in ours, more sublimated. Um, some of the dynamics still at work. So the concept is we're just given the gift, you could say, of uncertainty, the gift of contemplation. We seem to be a species that reflects on its own existence.
Right.
We don't know for a fact whether animals do or don't do that. Reflect. Oh, I wonder what kind of day it's going to be for me. That kind of thing, or maybe I should change my habit or attitude about this or that and the other thing. So we seem to be. You check me if this resonates. A kind of existence in which we're both doing it, living it, and contemplating it and exploring it at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, exploring it feels like resonant with me. Um, this kind of meeting that uncertainty in a certain kind of way, and then also, yeah, I guess contemplating is part of my practice of like when I've not been meeting that uncertainty head on, there's some kind of habitual tendency to not meet that uncertainty. If I can, well, if certain parts of me feel maybe threatened or something,
Hmm.
there's a
Well,
habit to
you're
be
taking
like,
it very personally, which is great, and that's ultimately that drives our whatever inquiry we have is more personal than sometimes we frame it. You know, philosophers are talking about the general thing, sociologists are talking about the general thing, philosophers are talking about the general thing, but really what you got is a scared rabbit in the corner of a room when you're talking about it. And we are at the same time, we're the doctor and the patient.
mm,
We're the scientist and the experiment.
hmm
So we have this sort of strange, when you look at it from a third perspective of just like, let's say you just landed here from some other realm. Wow, these people are living it and talking and thinking about it at the same time.
yeah,
And the overwhelming crescendo of that is physical death, because these are beings who have no manual about what happens when you die. They have spiritual documents that exist, and they have theories, and they argue bitterly about afterlife and kind of like maybe that's better than this one. You see a lot of that in this world at this time. It's like if somebody's convinced that the next life is better than this one, they're not very careful with this one necessarily,
mm,
and makes them kind of reckless in a way. So we have all these variations, right, John?
yeah, yeah,
At the same time, we're kind of sweet when we're contemplating it. You look at somebody and they're a little uncertain, and it makes them less arrogant, less pushy. So uncertainty might be it might have a healthy element to it.
yeah. I would, uh, I would say that there's like um, there's a vulnerableness to it. Um, so yeah, there's like there's humility in it for sure.
Yeah, so that's why I modulated the thread of the conversation. The big message is the death of the physical body, which is a large scale uncertainty and a big topic of letting go of everything. If you're a Buddhist friend or teacher, when somebody's dying, you tell them, let go. Don't cling to this life. Don't cling to that body. Don't cling to that nice sweater you have on there. Don't cling to the time and place. Don't cling to your friends. Don't cling to your loved ones. Don't cling to your favorite food. Don't cling to fixed ideas about reality. You literally whisper that in their ears, and then you say, if there is continuity, at that point, you may or may not be able to recognize um, the framework of your consciousness without the body. So the best training for it is dream work. That like in a dream, you're in some kind of body of some kind of identity, right?
Mm,
But you're not as certain, and it keeps shifting and moving around. So practicing apparent experience with some degree of precision and openness is the real instruction from Buddhist point of view of dying. So you say to them, whatever appears, don't be freaked out. Whatever you see or hear, um, um, recognize that to some extent it's your own projections as it is when you're embodied. And rather than running from it or towards it, just kind of allow for some kind of awareness to permeate the whole situation.
yeah, I'd love to explore this more with you because as I was um contemplating or thinking about having this conversation with you, one of the pith instructions that I've heard you um say before, and I might get this wrong, but it was something like when things are going badly, don't panic, and when things are going well, don't relax. And I think I've noticed in myself sometimes when I'm letting go, there's a tendency, or when I think I'm shifting into like, or I'm doing some maneuver or something that I call letting go, I can go into relaxation. And so I'm just kind of wondering what I feel like there's some nuance there that I'm maybe not always in touch with that
Yeah,
I'd love to get into.
beautiful. And as you know, I reiterate that as an instruction that I got from my teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, in a very much not a official formal talk. You know that he taught sometimes with hundreds of people, students there, but sometimes you were just in a room with the two of you and talking. And in one occasion, he said, "Yeah, don't panic." And actually, two different occasions I can think of. And then in one case, he said, "Yeah, and also don't go limp, when you're feeling like things are going well. Don't just lay off duty." So the continuity is of awareness in either of those situations. That's the key point: is can you maintain without struggling a natural state of awareness that is not attached to the outcome particularly, and not judgmental, and not manipulative, um, and is considered a hidden texture in the human experience, this kind of awareness. And in fact, you could say some people would say that it is the jewel of our existence, is this awareness that is not fabricated, that is not brought about by causes and conditions, and that permeates our whole experience. And when we're ignoring something, that's what we're actually ignoring, and creating some other kind of more fixed, identifiable, dualistic framework that at least is familiar.
Hmm. Yeah, because I think there's a certain intensity maybe to that um form of awareness, or there can be intensity in that maybe if you're not. I know for myself, like in reaching the end of maybe some kind of rational dialogue or something, there's a real, oh, I don't know, or there's a real, I have to let go of like some kind of held belief I've had, or I can't really know. So now there's like a um intensity in my body, or there can be. I wonder about that um in regards to letting go, because yeah, there's a letting go. I could interpret the instruction to let go of like, okay, make this intensity go away.
Yeah, which is more that kind of um, uh, incorrect kind of take on what letting go might mean, because you haven't really let go of at all. Actually, you're just kind of saying it. So the idea of letting go is, we all have moments of that. I think our life has it built into it. For example, the two things I thought of right away is, are you a good swimmer?
I'm okay. I can swim. Yeah.
Can you dive?
No, not well at all.
Diving is a perfect example of a certain notion of letting go. You have to prepare properly for diving. And when you train as a kid, I don't know, maybe they didn't train you when you're 8 or 9 years old to dive. Maybe you didn't, maybe it's still something we could do going forward, because it's never too late for that. But the point is that you practice on land first. uh, you get in the right shape, you develop the right kind of contour, the right awareness, the right sensibility. And then you get up on the edge of the pool. And at first, you just sort of do a very simple kind of just plunk into the pool. You just drop your head in so that you're going to be okay, basically. And at a certain point, somehow you go through the stages of that, all the way up to you see these, guys on YouTube, people on YouTube diving off a 50-foot cliff. And so the preparation is important. That's one thing. If somebody just said, just let go, it doesn't mean you're driving a car at, 60 miles an hour down the road and you say, I'm just going to let go of the wheel. Um, that would be ill-advised.
Hmm.
So there's preparation and discipline, but there is a moment in diving where you have left behind that which you were holding on to, and you have not yet arrived at the next medium, which is like, okay, now I'm in the water. So this introduces this profound idea of a gap. The gap being for us human beings difficult to navigate sometimes because it's uncertain, and it also has the same meaning as bardo, in between. You're in between the safety of standing on the side of the pool and the comfort of swimming in the water once you're there. And we experience that as a kind of, as you said, an increase of certain kind of energy. It's like a shot. It's like a vitamin shot. And that's worth noting that in between, we're outside of the limited energy of sort of ego framing, and we're into a much bigger energy field, which yogis and people like you, we go to on purpose. We check it out on purpose. We go, well, I get the familiar rhythm of life, and I could, it's funny, I could look at you and look at me and go like, okay, in 40 years, you're going to look like this, and you're going to have had these experiences, and you should, have a family and have a job and a career and all. And then you end up just like this, like in 1 second later. So if we don't navigate some uncertainty in our lives, we will cling to predictability subtly and grossly.
Hmm.
But if we're too sloppy about exploring unpredictability, we could just create a mess for ourselves and others.
Right. So from what I'm hearing, it sounds like an important part of this is an attunement to
Ooh.
the wider field of energy.
A sneeze is a perfect example, right? There's that moment. Sorry, I didn't do it to illustrate that point, but at the same time. So excuse me. Can you please repeat what you said?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that like there's an attunement to the energy field that seems important in letting go. Um, that I'd love to explore with you. Like there's um yeah, a letting go, and then it's not like there's nothing there. There's like a field of energy. And there's that seems important.
Yeah, it's great that you have that perspective because I guess if we did it in terms of science, it wouldn't be utterly inappropriate to think of it as a quantum field of probabilities rather than a predictable field of inevitable outcomes.
Hmm.
And so when you enter the quantum field, you haven't left the grid completely. There's still certain parameters, and you were somewhere, you're going somewhere, but it's not following a kind of limited, predictable arc of inevitable outcome, which is why we Buddhists, say karma is not fate or destiny; it's probabilities.
Hmm.
Most people think, well, if I do this, then that will happen. And like, for example, if you sin, you're going to go to hell, or whatever people believe.
Hmm.
I'm stunned by how lately I feel so surrounded by people who believe things like as if what you don't, they're not even curious by what you believe or anybody else believes. So, and I think I see that rampant at the moment in human society is, trying to stabilize a belief system and really, really take others to account if they don't buy into it, which is just egomania, basically, right? There's a certain kind of centric, egocentric. It's
Yeah, there's
egocentric, even if
certainly
it's
like a
disguised as religion or whatever. It's still egocentric.
yeah, it's a clinging, and I guess like what I see there is like the clinging. I don't know, the way that I might understand it is the clinging allows one not to meet the intensity of the energy field. That's might be how I describe it.
That's brilliant. I mean, yes, I agree with you that clinging and ignorant kind of style allows you to operate in a lower energy field, therefore more comfortable, superficially speaking.
Yeah,
You
so
know,
it's like things you're used to.
yes,
Um,
it has a lot to do with familiarity
hmm.
and predictability. So it's not, kind of the warrior's path is kind of noting that and kind of signing up for a higher risk situation because you can see the other one is like the writing's on the wall. It's just going to go like this. You start dialing your energy down, you're going to go down to zero at a certain point, and kind of um, life, doesn't become an adventure anymore.
I'm curious if you can remember or a moment in your own life comes to mind around like this orientating or turning towards adventure, or like maybe there's predictability here.
Yeah.
I can, there's a next move that's maybe available, and if anything comes to mind.
Well, right away, music comes to mind, John. Like when you're playing, I love jazz a lot, and I went to see some friends play jazz out here in Long Island a couple of weeks ago. This I have a good friend named Randy Brecker, who's like a world-class trumpet jazz player, and his wife Ada Rovati, who's Italian saxophone player, and they played some very high-level good players, and they were playing, and they hadn't got there in time to rehearse. So they're sight reading these fairly complicated pieces of music, which require tons of improvisation. It's mostly improv. And afterwards, I talked to her about it, and she said, "Wow, we really, took a dive there with not even a run through of it." But to me, they had so much skill that it was fascinating to watch them navigate that space and create coherence at the edge of that field of exploration. So I think music is really a great example for um, feeling the moment, but you have to have a lot of training to do that right. Otherwise, you end up, they call it free jazz, which just means you're just making noise. You don't really know what you're doing, on some level. So freedom and discipline would be the partners on this exploration, I guess, which is unusual. I don't think we really usually think of them together, do we?
No, I think the where it is most alive in my experiences, I run um these Sunday meetings where people come and have conversation, and I don't give prompts or what you should talk about. I kind of just pair people together, and I'll take part as well.
Wow.
Um, and there's some freedom in that. And then what I'm noticing more recently is I have to bring some discipline in kind of how I set up the situation, um, so that people can kind of arrive in that space. But I would be really curious um if there's any like way you can uh talk about how in conversation, like conversation seems like something that everybody can do, but there's parallels with music. Like I want to know like what kind of things would you say to people if they were like, how do you have good conversation? Like
Yeah.
where's where what's there's a musicality to it sometimes, and there's certainly
Oh,
discipline
yeah.
and freedom. Yeah.
And that's what you're doing. You're creating a kind of cafe society in a way, right? You're putting people together and say, let's explore, which is kind of cool. And I think actually, we have the formal explorations, with the workshops and all those kind of things. And then we have the kind of rigid social structures, excuse me, where you're supposed to, how are you and how's the family and whatever. But there aren't many contexts in which people could just get together and talk with some degree of acceptable degree of intimacy, but maybe not in a totally predictable way. And why, I think this is spontaneous thought here that the very same thing that creates the obstacle, which you could say is grasping, aggression, ignorance, those are like, as Buddhists, we talk about those three really serious root problems, kleshas, that we have. those are the very things that are inviting us to 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 the party. Passion is inviting us to the party. The heat and sort of vividness of disagreement is inviting us to the party. The kind of expanse of just looking at the big picture, the kind of giant ignorance, spacious ignorance, is inviting us to explore at a whole nother level. So it's the very same thing. The poison is the medicine at the same time. So what's tricky is that I've noticed when people start to really talk, they could get into a fight. They could become very drawn towards each other in almost like, a way that's distracting or disturbing to one or both of them. Or there's a passive aggression. You just want that person to go away. So in pairing people together, it'd be interesting if those three experiences could get modulated so they don't become toxic and dangerous and unhealthy, but could become the stepping stone for a deeper conversation. So I don't know. This is just my perception is that people are scared of um, combat. They're scared of making love, and they're scared of space.
Hmm. Yeah. So there's vulnerability in all three, but maybe that's simplifying it. I wonder, like, do you have a sense of why people are scared of each one of those things?
Well, the simplest version would be they're either the tether for an egocentric point of view, which is one form of scare, and they're also the vehicle for going beyond an egocentric point of view because you're entering the fray, you're entering the non-dual dance and rhythm of the thing. Either one of those is, uh, I think take something like debate, which is used to be a good thing in the spiritual communities. It started in India, when there were so many different valuable traditions and they would get together and have formal debates. Can you imagine having those kind of debates now between like different schools or different traditions? I mean, I guess it's maybe in universities they can do it or, some special place, but mostly it's ranting and raving these days, my way or the highway.
Hmm.
And because it could break up into a very big, um, festival of competition and aggression, but it could also open up some serious um, possibilities for expanding perspectives. And the best example of that is a couple. If you and I could go for a walk through London and you point to any couple and then you just say, "Hey, how the two of you doing together?" And the different perspectives would most generally shift off, and there would be things that they wouldn't talk about, or there'd be things that would cause consternation. So my unfortunate experience this late in the game is that most couples are just like walking next to each other,
Hmm.
not
Yeah,
not really with each other. It's a very
there's
very cynical point of view, but I happen to like kind of have a feeling that we haven't gotten there yet with couples really doing the work together, and doing the processing together. And there are some who do, and it's a very very rich environment.
yeah. There's someone said something to me today that like, oh no, not today, in the last week or so, um, that like tension is quite creative. Um,
Mm.
and that resonated with me is like, oh, when I'm sitting in or when I'm present in more uh when I'm more present, there's that energy field and there's some tension in that energy field, and that's almost that tension is kind of the creative stuff.
Yeah, and some people find that quite attractive. It's interesting if you look at bands, over the
Hmm.
years, like the Beatles or somebody like that. You know, if you watch that Let It Be documentary, you could see they're just they're heroes to the rest of us as harmonizing and creating this unbelievably connected experience. But behind the scenes, there's kind of differences of opinion, and so this is just an interesting aspect of our. Again, I don't mean to sound like I'm not a human being, because obviously I am one. But if you were looking at it from the point of view of just being the scientist and the experiment at the same time, these are aspects of human gathering that are kind of intriguing in a way. That we can create, if we harmonize, we can create amazing things together. But if we have friction, we can create the most horrible possibilities you can imagine. And we're well on our way to doing that in this conversation. If you look what's happening in the world, we're well on our way to creating a level of conflict that hopefully we can still resolve at some point. But it's quite uh, scary, isn't it, right now? What's happening? I don't know what you're experiencing over there in England, but it feels like we're in a scary time because people have gotten to the point where they're just not going to talk. It's like it's divorce time. You just get the
Hmm.
lawyers. In this case, the lawyers are the bombs and the military.
Yeah. It's part of it, I guess, is maybe people don't see another way at the moment. That's maybe part of it. And like I think I've got actually written down here um because I thought it'd be interesting to talk to you about it in the context of letting go. These two words, power and money.
Yeah.
Um, and these things seem like the things that might drive one's decision making, um, that causes kind of harm and suffering and yeah, divorce and war.
Yeah, power and money are elements of control. It's even that might even be control, might be even more of a unifying principle there.
Hmm.
Um, do you want control? And it's so interesting if you think about surfing. I just saw like 100-foot wave. Do you want to control that wave as a surfer? No, you want to ride it,
Hmm.
but you need a lot of training to do that and to let go at the right time and sort of put your effort into it at the right time. So I think this is just our core um, dilemma. If like very few people would just relish that adventure. I mean, they're few and far between of that kind of dynamic living. And most of us like it's just not comfortable enough. So we get cozy and comfortable in our predictable situation. And then gradually we get old and sick and die. And then we maybe at the last minute freak out quite a bit, actually. People don't usually die well.
Now I'm wondering, kind of again, obviously these Tibetan traditions they talk about preparation for death, and then there's also there's maybe I'm wrong. I would like to know more about this. Really, there's a there's a certain respect for the householder path as well as like kind of the wandering monastic yogi
Yeah.
like Patrul Rinpoche, kind of like everywhere, kind of can't hard to pin down. And that hard to pin down is that traveling yogi that seems more like the surfing the wave on the surface. But I wonder if there's if what's does the householder path have that same kind of, is the surfing in that? Is there the potential to surf the
Yeah.
wave in the way that you're speaking to it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And in a way, that question in the spiritual domain is householder versus like, yogic style practitioner. Is this a mirror question to the one of living uh, very much in the world as a householder and engaged and living out of it as somebody who's just observing, oh, those poor people, they're getting married, and they're doing this, they're doing that. So you're like, I gave all that up. I'm a renunciate, and it seems clear to me from what I like, for example, Trungpa Rinpoche, who was my teacher, was trained as a monk, no doubt about it. From the age of 2, Tibet, and then circumstances intervened. He had to escape from Tibet, and then he came to the West and started teaching as a monk in the West, as a Tibetan monk. And he just thought he was an object of people's fascination. He couldn't really communicate the essence of the teachings. So at a certain point, he got dramatic feedback about that. And he disrobed and he married a young English girl at the time. She was 16, and he was probably early 20s or so. And and then he became a householder uh, with no real training in his early life as to what a householder life would be like, but with so much training discipline that the two realities just merged in him. There's no doubt about it. He had a monastic level of discipline every day, including how he ate food and talked to people and set a schedule and stuff like that. Uh, you can't shake that level of discipline once you have it. It's like a great classical musician playing jazz. They don't all of a sudden become like sloppy. They have deep technique to draw on. So, is there a world in which the monastic and the householder that you're talking about could be considered merged properly, and in which, therefore, the sacred and the secular are merged properly? And you know, uh, it seems until they are, you haven't completed a certain part of your journey
Hmm.
because you're still holding to one or the other as a kind of base of operations. So what you'd want to be is a householder with the mind of a monastic. Um, and if you're going to be a monastic, you don't want to be tied into the rules to the point where you're just becoming a good little boy or girl, and you know, um, you know, you're going to get your sense of security and safety out of that.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a very, and our tradition, the Kagyu Buddhist tradition of Tibetan Buddhism is laced with lineage holders of both types.
Hmm.
That's all you have to do is study that lineage, and you'll see what I'm talking about here.
I've got two threads in my mind here. One is I noticed that um sometimes there's some teaching in the way that like somebody walks, like a practitioner, the way a practitioner walks can be a teaching. And I thought that came to mind as you were speaking. And I was wondering if there was anything you could share about the way that Chogun Trungpa would eat food or would go about his
Yeah.
daily activities that conveyed something to you personally. And then also I'd love to just explore like discipline.
What a great question. And this is where I feel a little bit sad that, that people have a limited access to experiencing highly realized individuals in everyday life. Not that they aren't around somewhat, but it was almost the end of a golden era. The period in which the Tibetan Buddhism came was popped out of Tibet and scattered out throughout the world. So you can get tastes of this cultural envelope in Nepal, in Sikkim and Bhutan, uh, and in small pockets elsewhere in India and around the world. Um, but the fact is, the Tibetan culture, as did the Japanese culture and other Asian cultures, become containers for what you're talking about right now. I've said to I teach a lot in Japan, and we have a community there called True Nature,
Hmm.
which is a wonderful community of practitioners in Japan. And I said, you have it in the soup. You have it in the way that people set the table. You have it in the way that people walk. You could go into a Starbucks in Japan, and it's like a Zendo. Nobody's pushing, nobody's mindless. It's just, the culture has become a carrier of the mindfulness, awareness, compassionate gene. To me, this is a post-Buddhist society in a way,
Hmm.
you know, and then you can lose the thread. So then they become fascinated with the toys of materialism and so forth, and they get speedy and they get blocked up. Um, So it's a cycle. You can't just glue it into place. You have to keep cultivating it. But without a doubt, Trungpa was about creating a social context in which these values would be highly cherished and integrated. No doubt about it. He called it Shambhala vision. The and metaphor was the Shambhala kingdom, which was supposed to be a highly realized secular kind of situation. So, these are, how do you create that? And the first thing is you would need some kind of cohesive set of teachings that would illuminate the possibilities and the pathways. Two, you'd need a game group of explorers who would say, we're kind of going to put that as a high priority to cultivate in our lifetimes, with each other. Uh, and maybe you need a little bit of opportunity. You can't do that when war is raging. It's very hard to do that when chaos is everywhere. So that's what's called a Kali Yuga or a dark age. It's hard to cultivate what we're talking about. And it tends to get hidden and underground as a possibility. But definitely people have had this in this world that we're talking about. More and more relative level of some kind of sanity and wisdom in a cultural setting.
Yeah. As you talk about like a cohesive set of teachings, um, there's a there was part of me that was like, well, can I not just trust the practice itself? Like, is there a way in which, um, if the practice of like sitting meditation, or just, um, yeah, sitting with oneself, examining that experience or being with that experience with awareness, and is that enough? Um, and I'm also want to pick up the thread again of discipline. Maybe that's related
Mm-hmm.
to this.
Yeah. So it's interesting how these things are talked about. Of course, there are instructions left. Uh, there's two possible realities we live in. Buddha supposedly, after a lot of hard work and exploration, became fully realized. That generally all the stories agree to that. And then when that happened, he became silent for quite a while. Like, what would you say? Who would you say it to? And then started a spontaneous discourse for 40 years that was never written down because they didn't have a written language for 200 years. So this was an oral tradition of people memorizing stuff and passing it along. Who knows how accurate it is? 200 years later, they had a council and they wrote it down in the Pali language at the time, and then it was sort of upgraded to Sanskrit for the Brahmin population of India, and then every other language on the planet. Who knows what you're getting at the end of that? All of that, 2,500 years later, uh, and he could have just said nothing, and you and I wouldn't even know each other. We wouldn't be having this conversation. I could just see we might have bumped into each other in a cafe in London, just like you're sitting there. I said, well, "Who's that guy? That guy looks, I don't know, he looks interesting." So, yeah, these are breadcrumbs and methods, but they also talk about a very important part of the teaching is called transmission, as you know, and specifically it's called pointing out, which has become a kind of keynote of Tibetan Buddhism, in particular Vajrayana Buddhism. That the awareness you're talking about, which is a kind of natural thing, somebody can Buddha discovered it. Nobody pointed it out to him. Very, very important point. He discovered it. That I've been sitting on my awareness this whole time in the form of this cushion. I've been sitting on my awareness in the form of the air in this room. I've been sitting on my awareness in the form of the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. I've been sitting on my awareness in terms of having space around my thoughts to even observe the fact that I have a mind and thoughts are coming and going. That's all natural awareness. Nobody gives you that. But he discovered it, and he discovered it as a hidden jewel. Not something that like it's super obvious, so it's not obvious. It's super ordinary, so it's not ordinary. And then from there on, there is a tradition that evolved of a teacher pointing to that unconditioned awareness. And you're not pointing to like, oh, you could develop this. If you do this, this, and this, you'll achieve this. Pointing to it as an underlying condition of your already existing situation. And that's called a pointing out style of instruction. And we're at the end of thousands of years of that. So they call it putting the Buddha in the palm of your hand, pointing out, and all the teachers during that point is pointing to what the Buddha discovered on his own, and it's an accelerant. So that's why Buddha opened his mouth, is to accelerate other people's karma out of compassion. So deep bow there, whoever that was, that person had a choice.
And discipline would I be right to characterize discipline as um like remembering? Um,
Yes, exactly. It's even called that. Mindfulness, smriti, means recollection.
hmm.
You're remembering. It should be like, oh, I'm here. This is happening. And the rest of it was a dream. I was dreaming. I was dreaming I was back in sixth grade with my friend, and he got me in a headlock, and I couldn't get out, and my sister came up and made him let go of me. And then I was embarrassed. I was dreaming that I was back there for 10 minutes. I was like, if you looked at me, I'd be like, oh. You look at people on the train or walking down the street. Oh, where are we're like wandering through samsara, through memories and projections. So it's remembering that you are here in this moment, um, and that you are at the same time completely innocent and very, very knowledgeable somehow.
There's that moment then of remembering. So I'm here. The energy field is here. And then there's some like the word intuition. I'd love you to talk about what intuition is or what your experience of intuition is or how intuition might have been explained to you.
Yeah, I think I feel where you're going with that, and that space of kind of remembering and then kind of settling in a way, excuse me, seems to be the ground of intuition. And you know, we talk about first thought, best thought, which is something Trungpa Rinpoche used to say regularly. But I have a little video on it. I said before first thought is non-thought. You have to enter that space of like, resting in the present awareness, and then the first thought comes out of that. Otherwise, it's going to be like the end of a long contemplation about, should I do this? Should I do that? I don't know. So and so said they like it. I don't like it. Do one creative thing in your life. Try to write a poem, and then just read it to people. And as soon as they start telling you what they think of it, you're gone. You're lost. It's over. The intuitive part is over, and now you're into craft. So leaving that space for the intuition to just express itself is humble, because the minute you grasp onto it and go like, I did that poem, you know, like, and that's where death really comes in handy. Because on your deathbed, you're not going to say, "Oh, I wrote a great poem," because you're not going to give a shit. You won't even be able to get your next breath. You think you're gonna be thinking, "Oh, I'm the guy who wrote this great poem. I was famous for like 2 years or something like that." You're just gonna want the next breath. You would trade all of it for the next breath. You would trade every penny you had.
Well, thank you, David. Is there anything else you think is worth exploring here? Like, there's a there's I think there's loads that people and myself can receive out of this conversation. Um, but yeah, I'd like to know if there's anything else that comes is
You know,
coming up.
we could do, John, is this just a suggestion? If you want to like talk with your groups about these things, inspired by this conversation, and then make a list of things that come up out of that, either questions or comments or something like that. It might be fun to get together again in a month or two if you do that and take track of that and just let us respond to what this stimulated in various people. That'd be
Hmm.
an interesting experiment.
Yeah, I'll
And you could have a list of like 10 or 20 points that came up, um, and we could address those so the conversation has some kind of evolution to it.
cool. That sounds good. So I'll maybe I'll share this conversation with them. And the way I do the community actually, it's called Beings Club. And my uh I sit in the seat of facilitator and member.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really sit in the seat of teacher, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that said, there's no way that, my parts of my um training and study through the stuff at Dharma Moon, the MMTT that I did, the level one training was awesome. And that certainly bleeds into the way that I am in those interactions. The same with a previous meditation mindfulness teacher training I did with Jack Cornfield and Tara Brach
Mm.
also bleeds in a certain different way. I like to think of the first teacher training was I was really getting intimate with gentleness, as you would frame it, and then with the training with you, I was getting intimate um with precision a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And so letting go was quite a nice thing for us to talk about today as kind of the
Right. That's the
the
third one,
spirituality.
right? The gentleness, precision, and the letting go are the three wheels of our wagon, and they really counterpoint each other. So sure, I mean, in the sense of I'm certainly inviting people to go to dharmamoon.com and look at our trainings that are available, all kinds of different, training, and please everybody do if you're so inspired. But to create a little pod out here in the universe with the friends that you're gathering, and to be able to like move some of these conversations through, so it stimulates prajna, intelligence in the gang, and then it gets to be interactive. That's a big part of how uh, I have found that to be a rich part of the whole Buddhist environment, is that it's interactive. When it just becomes, a sage on the stage and a download, I'm less taken with it. It just sounds like everything else. But when it becomes really kind of investigative reporting of the highest level, um, and you can go right back to I'm going right back to the words of the Buddha now, kind of intensely. I'm teaching on Abhidharma, which is like a very original kind of content of Buddha's teaching, the philosophy of mind. And I'm reading the sutras, um, in the words of the Buddha, uh, and a well orchestrated attempt to present exactly what was it like at that point, talking to that person. Who were they? What was going on? Because we tend to reify and mythologize people like that, but there's no doubt that he had 2 feet, two arms, and 2 legs, and 2 eyes, and you know the same equipment. And so I find it maybe a little counterproductive to think about cosmic dimension of it and think, what happened? Like, for example, John, how did he talk to a large group of people? They didn't have microphones and PA systems. And I heard somebody tell me that they did it like they would have people standing out like 50 feet out who would repeat it. And so for that next group of people, they could hear it. But, this idea of like, just take the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, the source of suffering. Everybody should be chewing on that, right? It's like if it just becomes another pablum to repeat, I don't know what value it really has. But if you chew on it and you go like, oh God, there's so much suffering in this world. It's so pervasive. And it's so hidden because people want to look good and everything's happening good. And then you get rich and you can, as you said, powerful, you can cover it over. But if you dig deep, we have this dukkha thing, and nobody is trained to look at it like a good doctor is. Like, what is the diagnosis? As opposed to just bring me in a brilliant surgeon and knock me out so that they can operate on me while I'm unconscious.
Yeah, and what you said at the beginning is important in that sense. Like we can be the doctor and the patient. I think that's
We
so
have
important.
to in this way we have to, which doesn't mean you can't find a great diagnosis and a great but we can't be dependent. We can't be dependent. We can be interdependent, but not codependent.
Mm, nice.
Okay. Well, it's always great to talk to you, John.
Yeah, pleasure.
I, I,
Thank
I
you.
support you as you know and what you're doing, and really um, we'll be happy to be part of however you want to include. Um,
Yeah, I love
uh,
that.
uh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'll be in
So
touch.
keep going on.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you for your time. Be well.